outside, right? It's been a beautiful, beautiful weekend, and I know it was hard to come in. Many of you have been with Bruce before, but let me share a bit about him. We are pleased that he's joined us, even though it's almost the middle of the afternoon for him. Bruce is an author, speaker, parent, consultant, coach, podcaster, and pastor. He has done a lot of work locally and nationally. He writes and speaks on issues of faith and technology, race, and culture. Currently, Bruce is serving as the pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, and he is a senior consultant with the Convergence Network. Bruce is very active online and across social networking. He has a reputation of successfully guiding communities and their leaders into technological spaces and honoring community in the midst of that. And so we think he is the perfect person to share with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say. Would you join me in a word of prayer? Gracious God, thank you for your presence with us and for, at least in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, the wonderful weather that we have been enjoying. We know that it is short-lived, but we certainly have appreciated it. Bless us as we turn our attention to Bruce and to you now to consider the technology, the gifts, struggles, and how through this we are called to reach for beloved community. It is always our goal to live your kingdom come. And so we thank you for these opportunities we are having to explore that more deeply, potentially in some areas that are tough for us. Thank you, Lord. Amen. And so, Bruce, without further ado, it's your turn. Thank you.
Great. It is good to be with you all. Let me see if I can share my screen here. All right. Good to be with you. Yeah, it is Sunday about 4 o'clock my time. So I'm just kind of getting off the low of Sunday and back up. And so good to be with you all. Our weather is, we just had a rainstorm pass through and now it's blue sky. So I don't know what's going on here, but it's cold here in Palo Alto. It is good to be with you. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about technology, but also my understanding of beloved community. And I'll talk about why that I don't separate those. I don't kind of think you have beloved community and you have technology and we're just kind of creating beloved community and we happen to be using mechanisms of technology. So let me tell you about what we're going to do first. So some of you have been with me on some speaking things in the last couple of months. And I do want to talk through a little bit. I'll do a little bit of introduction, but I want to frame kind of my perspective and what's going on just in terms of COVID and our leadership during these last 8 months, no matter what you're doing right now in your church life, to really begin to think about how we're being stretched to be a little more adaptive and agile and all those, buzzwords that we used to think were buzzwords, but now we're like, oh, we actually need to be agile and adapt and all those kinds of things. So we're going to walk through a little bit of that. We're going to do some breakouts and have a couple of questions for you. Then we'll share back as a big group, and then we'll do some Q&A. So we'll do Q&A kind of in a chunk. And the second part, then we'll do talking about digital space and the nature of a generous and expansive table, and some of my thoughts around how to create that and what that means for us. And then we'll do breakouts again, and then some Q&A. So let me do a little bit of introduction first. I make no assumptions that people necessarily know who I am or what I've been doing. So I want to give context for what I do and who I am, because it's important to kind of set that for everyone. First and foremost, I am a child of the 80s. So one of the ways I look at that is I was a student in high school when they were just shifting over from typing class to keyboarding class. And so I learned early about technology and computers. And, I played a lot of video games when they were still in the arcade. I didn't shift back over when they came into the home. This is me sitting at an internship, typing into an old PC, probably the last time I wore a tie in consecutive days in a very, very long time. I come out of a Presbyterian church called Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton, California. It is my grandparents are founding members of that congregation. My grandfather in this picture is second from the right, Esteban de los Reyes, and came out of the Philippines, from the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, which is our partner in the Philippines. So not Catholic, specifically Protestant Filipino community. My home church is historically Filipino, but pretty diverse. It was a church that I grew up in that was progressive before I knew what progressive meant. So when I left there and went to see other churches, like, oh, you go to the progressive church in Stockton. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what that means, but sure. So I grew up in that kind of space. I'm now the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. Been there for a little over a year, arrived last April, moved to Palo Alto in July. So we've now officially been more in Palo Alto. More than half of our time has been in shelter in place and COVID time than not. So it's an interesting time to be here in Palo Alto. The congregation I'm serving, as you can tell just from this half of the sanctuary, it's an older white congregation, historically a social justice congregation. This is the church where Robert McAfee Brown preached. So they have a deep historic and textured social justice component to their DNA. And we're beginning to think about what that means for the life of the church and kind of retelling the story. And I can share stories about that later about how we're doing that as a congregation. But I'm there. I'm actually a part-time head of staff, which is an odd thing. I'm in 75% time, and then we have full-time associate and some other positions. It's kind of weird, so that I can do some other things on the side, and having a blast with these folks. I have raised 3 children with my wife, Robin. We have basically an online laboratory for the last 20 something years about how to use technology and how it gets used and all of those. I'm one of those parents that I actually probably know more about social media and technology than my kids do. Though my middle child, the one that is holding in the middle there, she is actually now a social media intern and consultant with a couple of organizations. So kind of fun to see. My oldest on the left there, Ev is just started seminary. So my mom's a Presbyterian minister, I'm a Presbyterian minister, and now we have the next generation, which as many pastors' kids, they would have said they would never have gone to seminary, but so there they are. I've been working on online community and creating spaces and curating spaces for worship and reflection and community for a long time. This is about 10 years ago. Somebody reminded me that we used to have worship on Twitter. Every Sunday evening, a bunch of us would gather together and just run worship on Twitter. And I look back on that, and it's fascinating that I was like, "Huh, that actually worked." We did the whole liturgies, and I mean, it was kind of an experiment at the time, but we were able to create some community there. Have started an online church community years ago, and continue to use online resources not as tools, but just as ways for people to interact. So one of the things that I'll talk about in a minute is around technology being not just a tactic, but technology is just a way of being, and to reshift our framing about how we see some of the ways in which we communicate. This is one of our one of our pulpits for the congregation I'm serving now. When it's nice out, I'll be in the backyard, and we try to do that. And now I'm in my office as it's cooling off. But our congregation has shifted fairly easily over to being full Zoom worship. So we are a Zoom community. We don't stream anywhere. And we have about 80 to 100 logins every Sunday, run it meeting style. And we are not going back into our congregation. We decided until the end of May, at least, maybe longer than that, because folks have experienced such a meaningful experience on Zoom. Nobody is actually eager to get back in person. So this is kind of the pulpit that I have. So one of the things for Presbyterians, I was moderator of our denomination, 2008 to 2010. I had a friend, was in a conversation with them, and they asked me to be a reference, and I said, sometimes it's helpful to have a moderator on there. Oftentimes it's not, depending on the church. And they said to me, "Oh, that's right, you were moderator." So it's not that big of a deal for most people, but I know for Presbyterians, it was a wonderful experience for me, and had a grew a deep affection for our denomination as we did that. But I share that only because this was now almost 12 years ago that this happened. And at that point, we were just getting into Facebook. We were just getting into Twitter. I had communities that were thinking about bringing charges against me during that run because I had a blog and it was felt that that was undue exposure to commissioners. So we think about the time from 2008 to now and how far we've actually come. I mean, it's 12 years, but it still seems amazing to me that our denomination has moved technologically as well as theologically in this far in what is a relatively short period of time. But I don't let this get to me. This is also me in the backyard in my fancy liturgical garb is what I do. All right. So when I think about all of this, I think about how we as pastors, leaders, whoever's in this space now, that we all have particular gifts for what we are called to be in the church. And that one of the things that we are allowed to do is to claim some of those, to figure out how we go about leading people into who God intends them to be and become. And so what does it mean for us to sit with folks in ways that help them to experience the holy and divine in the way that God intends? So this is going to look different in every space. It's going to look different in every community. And I rely on you all as you're hearing anything during our time to translate that for your church. Like, I think you all know your people best. You all know your communities best. And so how do you translate so that you can help lead them into where they may want to be going or where God may be leading them to go? All of that said, 8 months ago, we just hit this kind of wall with the pandemic and what it meant for us to now be church leaders in the midst of a very different world. And what that did is it forced us to rethink how we are going to be church. And I think we go through these ebbs and flows of what it means and what it forced it to do, and how it magnified both our capacities and our incapacities, how it magnified our gifts and skills and our ability to adapt, and then how it magnified some of those places that we're just not ready. So I want to walk us through kind of how I've experienced that rhythm as we are thinking about how we move our communities and we notice our communities into these new spaces. The first thing that I remember experiencing at the beginning of this was this moment of, yeah, I can do this. I got this. And we in our community and many around as we're following online, our core driving force was our deep care and concern for the people we serve. How do we make sure that they are connected to community, that they are not feeling isolated, that they know that their church and their pastor and their leadership are caring for them? So we tried all kinds of things. We tried all of these different things. Some people who love technology saw this as an opportunity, like every single technological thing they ever wanted to try, we're going to try it. Others, a little kicking and screaming. Others, like, I'm not doing this, I'm gonna wait it out. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but many of us tried all this kind of stuff, whether or not folks asked for them. And so I think we just kind of were throwing it in faithful ways, throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what would stick. And what we discovered, and I think many people discovered, is that people's their grace and patience, understanding was more evident than we probably ever could have imagined. For churches, even I bet the most crankiest churches and people were willing to be like, yeah, grace abounds. We're trying to do this. We don't know what's going on. Thank you for tending to us. And so there was a good number, a good level of grace and patience for folks. So we go through that phase. And then it keeps going, right? This isn't a short-term event. We discovered this is going to be a lot longer. And so then we begin to overfunction and we begin to do a bunch of things. We get ourselves overextended. I like thinking about this, not just being overwhelmed, because I think in some ways we've done that to ourselves. We've overextended ourselves in our need and yearning to serve people. And so we get this overwhelming thing. And then we try not to panic all the time. I think we see ourselves as people who need to be able to be reflective and be calm in some ways in the midst of all this chaos. And then, if you're like me or your pastors or whatever, you crash. There's this moment where you realize I can't keep this up. And so we begin to kind of go through these ebbs and flows. I recommit to self care. I'll maybe take a day off. I maybe take a Sunday off, and then we repeat the whole cycle again. Because I think this long term kind of situation is just overwhelming to us, and none of us were prepared for it or trained for it. And so we go through these phases where we have yet to begin to think long term about what we're going to do. But yet now I think is where many of us are, right? We are deeply embracing this time as the real new normal. This is now what we're going to be in. And we think year, 6 months, 9 months, year, and in some elements of what we've helped to create, this is it for, eternity. This is what we're going to be doing. And so now it's important for us to reflect on how we have modeled adaptive leadership and practices. What are the ways that, without maybe even thinking about it, you have like helped a congregation and a community discover new things about itself and ways to be that were in some ways forced upon a community, but you were able to be adaptive. And this adaptive leadership we heard about for years, and probably many of us thought it was just whatever. It's real. And so and in some ways we've soaked it in by osmosis, if not in practice. And so now we've actually been able to do some of that. And so we begin to reimagine and dream about the future, and we get a chance to do that, right? So what I'm hoping we begin to do now is we begin to think about, how have you led change? What are the ways in which you've moved from that point to now? How have you allowed yourself and your community to begin to adapt to new ways of being? And so begin to start thinking, what does this community look like in 6 months or a year or longer? How does your leadership begin to find some fruit and find some energy around thinking, okay, this is not just a crisis moment. This is a Kairos moment. This is a moment in our time where we're being called into something different. And so we need to begin to think about what will church look like in 6 months, a year, or longer, and then build our strategies around that. And so that's what I'm gonna do in my second section, is begin to talk about what does it look like for us to look at beloved community in a digital space. But I do want to say to you as you begin this, as I've been meeting with pastors groups all across our denomination and other spaces, I constantly hear people saying that they're surprised at how well the churches are doing. And I just feel like you should not be surprised. If you are a pastoral leader worth their salt and you have been faithful to that community, of course, your congregation is going to do well out of this. And you could define well however you want, but that whatever you've been doing, any of those moments of grace and things, you can always be surprised by God movement in your church. But at the same time, don't sell yourself short in the sense that you actually are able to lead these communities into some amazing places. I think too many of our churches have a low self-esteem about themselves, and I think denominationally and culturally, we've been telling ourselves at how much we're dying and how much people are leaving the church, all these kind of things, which some of that could be true. But that doesn't take away the fact that each of our communities has life in it, and we are able to bring that out, and it's just going to manifest itself differently congregation to congregation. So what I'm encouraging us to do today is to begin to think about, what have you done? What have you been able to do that has brought life and has exuded life out of this community, out of a time of struggle? And then what does that really begin to look like for the future? What does that, as you begin to land the plane around creating space and curating space that is generous, and it's expansive, and it is a digital space that begins for us to live out beloved community in a new and different way. So as you go into your breakouts for this first session, What I would like you to do, these are very simple questions, right? Your first question, just introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, ministry. And then what do you feel like about the current state of your ministry and congregation? Just give a little bit about how things are going. And then what have you learned about yourself and the congregation that you serve? So what's the current state? And then what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself and the congregation you're serving or the congregation you're part of? So I would, Michael, break you out into breakout groups, then we'll come back and we'll just do a little sharing and do some Q&A on this first part. And then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about beloved community in digital space. All right. Woo! For having some time in your group. It's a pretty small group. So Mike, is there a way we can go ahead and if we want to do some share backs and some talk backs with people, can we stay in gallery and have some interaction?
Sure.
It'd be great. I would just
They
love
need
to.
unmute themselves. Mike will give them a note.
Great.
You want them to unmute themselves, Sue?
Well, can you unmute them all? I thought you could just send them a note.
Yeah, everyone should be able to now unmute yourself, I believe.
I'd love to hear any interesting things that came out of your conversations about what you've what you've learned about yourself, kind of state of ministry, learned about yourself or your congregations. What are some of the things you've heard about each other or you want to share about your own context?
We heard about some Presbyterians behaving badly.
Sounds like a bad TV show or a podcast.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
I think in several of the churches, I think everybody in our group is meeting in person. And so the part of our pastoral struggle is not necessarily convincing people about masks, I don't think, but convincing people that social distancing is important. And even if they can't hear the person they're talking to, that doesn't mean they stand closer.
I know who was in your group. His name is like mine.
Well, I think it came from a few of us, I do believe.
Good.
Yeah, I don't trust our sessions, like we don't trust ourselves, basically. Like that was we came down to, we don't trust ourselves to not put ourselves in danger. So our community, again, we're out till the end of May, so I have a long runway for the church that I'm serving. But other things, what did you hear about yourselves? What have you learned about yourselves as leaders or as congregations? Probably every pastor, whether you're a member or in pastoral leadership, needs to take more time off. Probably have not taken the time away that we would normally have taken in normal time. So I talk a big game about that, but I've only taken 2 Sundays off since the beginning of March. So it's basically, that's what everybody should do. I don't do it very well. So we're getting there. We'll get there. I have 2 weeks scheduled off in a row in January. So I'm looking forward to that. All right. Other folks, any other learnings that you heard from each other or about what you've learned about yourselves or? All right. I'm going to keep going. Here we go. Let's go on to, I'm going to have to present this. Here we go. All right. Again, what I try to do when I talk about technology is that technology, we don't want to give it as much power as I think we like to give things that we think are going to save the future of the church. And that's very simplified. But, there was a day where we felt like if we just had a Facebook page or we just had a website, or if we just did this, then somehow the church was going to be saved and we'd be okay. And I think that comes out of a mindset that if we just hire a youth and young adults person, we will again grow our youth and young adults program and everybody will be fine. And what we know, it takes us many times of repeating and failing that's not how it works, that we don't, the church doesn't grow in body, mind, and spirit by kind of using these tactics, almost kind of a one size fits all, but really it's by being the church in its most genuine form for whatever context you're serving. I've always felt as a church planter, the church that I started, it wasn't that we were using technology in any special way. It was just who we were, and that's what we did. And it was genuine to who we were. And so I think for us, again, in the midst of all of these things, the future of many of our churches is going to be around Zoom, or it's going to be around, different technologies, but that's only a future. It is not the future of every single one of our churches. And so I think part of what I hope we can get to, folks, to understand that there are going to be differing levels and ways for us to be church. And that conversation was happening before pandemic. There were lots of people talking about we have to be, if we can't be Presbyterian in multiple forms and multiple expressions, then we are determining that we are going to be a very specific kind of church, and that we're determining that our structure and our style is what makes us Presbyterian. Many of us, and sure many of you, have argued, no, that's actually, our Presbyterianness is in what we believe about the people gathered to discern the mind of Christ and the will of God. And that can be expressed in a multitude of ways. And before it was maybe about style or culture, and now we're beginning to talk about what does that look like in terms of technology. So,
Bruce,
yep.
I don't know. Your screen sharing seems to have locked.
Oh,
We do not see it.
you don't see it.
Yeah,
I
we-
see it.
No,
Yeah, we see it.
I don't.
I
It
don't.
says, it says Bruce's screen sharing has started sharing.
Here, let me stop. I'm seeing it on my side. I'll stop.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Let me start it again and see what happens. Good call. Let's see.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. No, thank you. Thank you. So the slide that's supposed to come up says beloved community. So let's see. Yeah,
There
got
you
it?
go.
Okay. Hopefully it'll keep going. Go ahead and speak up if it stops. So let me talk a little bit about how I perceive the beloved community as I've watched a few of the videos and our people are thinking about what this looks like, working off of Martin Luther King's understanding of beloved community. For me, especially in these times, I like to think about this as empathy and compassion, and this where we have leaned and we have moved towards culturally is around the normalizing of dehumanizing one another. Now, this is not just about being nice to each other. This isn't about not holding people accountable, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this is actually when we begin to see another person and we are incapable of in any form seeing that person as a created child of God. That if we have gotten to the point, I think for many folks, that our initial reaction to somebody or something is not about the complex beauty in which they've been created, even when we disagree with them. I think that to extend this kind of perspective to people, as Martin Luther King talked a lot about, right, is not just about the people who we agree with and we already love, but it's about the people who may even hate us back and don't reciprocate it. That part of what we are supposed to do is be able to see an image of God in all of humanity, no matter who they are or what they've done. And that is not a trite or insignificant or easy thing to do, but being a beloved community is not an easy thing to do. And most of us fail at it over and over again because it's easier to dehumanize and one-dimensionalize another person. And I'm not taking, I want to make clear that this is not about just about not wanting, it's not about avoiding conflict or not about, wanting to not call people on their stuff, but it's this idea that beloved community is about extending ourselves beyond those who, again, who are already in our midst, who are already we see as kindred spirit, who are easy to love because they love us back. And I think that for most of us, we have fallen into a lot of spaces where we are in, welcomed or unwelcome echo chambers, and we have lost our ability to cross that. And again, I'm being very careful about this because I don't want to say that our next step is to extend, is to make ourselves vulnerable, because I do believe that beloved community, it doesn't mean that we are going to fail to hold people accountable, or that we allow ourselves to be in any kind of abusive or marginalized relationship, but that we acknowledge the humanity of another person. doesn't mean that you have to have coffee with them, invite you into your home, into their home, have these dramatic social media worthy experiences where everybody is transformed because you talk to somebody. All I'm saying is our initial reaction can't be one of dehumanizing. The beloved community is about stepping outside of those bounds that the world has set up for us, and be able to not see other people as absent of a divine part of who they are. Even people that do horrible things. Again, I'm not asking and saying that beloved community means everybody comes out for dinner and you hang out together. No, this is beloved community is much bigger than how we would manifest ourselves as understanding about community. That it is about pushing ourselves into space, into relationship, into communities where we have to acknowledge the humanity of another person. This is not about technology. It's not about any tactics, but it's about our deep understanding that all of humanity, we believe, are created, beautiful, complex, created creations of God. And it is not our job to determine who gets to be that, right? I don't get to determine whether you are created or you are created, but you are not. I have to believe either we're all created in the image of God or something else, but I'm going to choose to continue to believe that we're all created in the image of God, even though we all falter in certain ways, and in some of us in ways that we don't understand. So for us, as I begin to kind of move into this digital space, I think that we have to begin to normalize what we want to be normal. We have to begin to say to the world and to ourselves, this is the way we want to be, and then do it. Because unless we can't just talk about it and then hope it happens, we actually have to begin to think about, what do we see as our next manifestation of who we are as individuals and the church? Who is God asking us to become in the everyday and the every week as community and individual? And then do that to normalize that which we want to be. This quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," is often attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, but he never actually said this. This is the quote that he said, and it's a little small, so I'll read it for you. This is what he said. He said, "We but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies of the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do." So I think when I think about this as a way to challenge us to be the church that we think we are supposed to be in the world. And if you and your communities have committed to being a beloved community, one that sees creation in others and sees that kindness isn't weak, but it's a strength and a strong way of transformation, then we actually have to begin to live it. And so as we think about that in an online perspective, as we think about that in a digital space, and I think there's lots of ways you can talk about it. You can call it virtual, you can call it online, you can call it digital, whatever. We get what you mean. But I think about this as I don't create this kind of polarity between online and in person. And if you've ever heard me talk before, I always talk about this because I think it's really important that our online world and our in-person world, for most of us, are intertwined, that I do not believe one is better than the other, especially now what we're experiencing. One can enhance the other, but I don't even think those have to necessarily be truths either, that you can have a deeply personal and meaningful online relationship and a deeply meaningful in-person relationship. For our congregations, most of our communities into the future will have both, and they will enhance each other. The reason I bring this up all the time is there will always be folks that will say in person is the best way to be church. In person is the best way for us to be beloved community. And I simply reject that. I think it is a way. I think when done well, it's a great way. But the assumption that in person automatically means better community is simply false. We know that from the way we gather. If it is built on the assumption that every in-person interaction we have in church, or every in-person church has these deep, meaningful relationships, and we know that's not true. And so I don't like to put them against each other, but actually see them in complement and intertwined, and they ebb and flow, and they're kind of are in harmony together, whatever metaphor you need as they move back and forth in this. So I would I avoid trying to say which is better. You are always going to be drawn, for most of our folks in Presbyterian land, the inertia back to in-person is going to carry the day. And so if you are really thinking about an online experience or a digital experience that is going to be meaningful, you have to be really strategic and theological about why we want to do this and why you're going to lead people into this new space. So as I think about this, my metaphor and the thing I use, I think about this as a generous and expanded table. And what I think about this is because, for 25 years, I just had my 25th ordiversary on the 29th of October. For 25 years, we have spoken metaphorically behind these tables in our sanctuaries and have said, all are welcome. Nothing holds us back. We come from east and west, north and south, and sit at the table of God. All of these metaphorical things that says this particular wooden table that's right in front of us is welcome and everybody should be here. And now we have been given this opportunity to decide whether we think that's true. Technology has opened up this way for us to be in community and to think about that table in another metaphorical way that actually welcomes in more people. And so we can now be able to create this space that is generous and it is expanded beyond what we experienced when we were in person. And so for me, this is an opportunity to challenge myself and the community I serve, that what does it mean for us now when people are coming to our table who are never going to set foot in our particular city? When it comes to people are coming to our table from other countries, from other parts of the United States, who are seeing themselves now as part of this church and participating in things. What does it mean for us to say, well, this table is generous and expanded, but as soon as we don't need this table anymore, we're going back in person, and it was nice knowing you. What we're trying to create where we are is this idea that this is a way of being church, and it is not a temporal thing in terms of, life is temporal, but in terms of how we are going to be community, this is what we're going to do. This is a version of church that we believe in and is meaningful. So as I think about this, and I'm talking with our session, we're beginning to think about ways in which we theologically understand this. We're having conversation about our leaders' ability to champion this idea. What does it mean for us to be called beyond church and building in actuality? We've always said that to each other, but now what we are saying is the Spirit is moving us beyond our walls. Christ is present wherever it may be. Christ is present as we celebrate communion every Sunday over Zoom, and mean it and be able to say, yes, we believe this to be true. And so that we can begin to articulate that for other folks. And so as you're thinking about where you want to move, where you may want to head when your technological space is it something that you can champion? Is it something that is meaningful to you, that has an understanding that the Spirit is moving you into this direction? And I think the questions that seep into this are things like this. Is this real church versus not real church? And if you begin to have that inkling, real versus not real, then that's something to check. Because if you're even wavering on whether this is real church and this is not real church, that is a clue into where you may actually be able to lead, or at this particular moment are willing to lead, or where your people are. And so thinking about your own perspective about whether this can be church for you, because if you are preaching and you are leading worship as a DJ in front of a screen, and that is not a comfortable space for you, or not a space that you feel like you can grow into, then it's not going to be a space where you're going to thrive. And so asking your real self whether this is real for you. And then really the question overall, is the beloved community confined by proximity and geography? And if the answer is, yeah, for us it is, that's fine. And what does that mean? Or if it's no, actually, our beloved community, we see this as a broadening beyond our proximity and geography. I say that especially for churches that offer a particular theological space that may be isolated because of where you are geographically. We have folks that visit and attend to our service because of our particular social justice progressive space, and they're coming out of places where that doesn't exist for them. And so we are being a home for people who have not been able to find a theological home in the past. And so our beloved community and how we are growing is because we have made the decision that it's not confined by proximity and geography, and all really are welcome into that space. So it's a lot of stuff, I know, but I'm going to send you to breakouts again. So, because I want you to talk about digital opportunities, then we'll come back and do some more Q&A. So what digital opportunities for being the beloved community is God revealing? Right? There may be none. That is a perfectly okay answer. I think you lifted up before capacity. We got to understand who we really are, but what are they? And digital opportunities are not just about Zoom and online, right? Technology comes in a lot of different forms these days. So begin to kind of stretch, and then what may be the obstacles to get there. So opportunities and obstacles, pretty simple. All right, Mike, let's break them up a little bit. We'll take a few questions. I do want to offer a few things that our community has done to create some of this space that is very easy.
Good.
Ability to kind of try some new things, but not be particularly difficult. One is now that if you are able to do Zoom and you're able to do the kinds of things to gather people in an online space, invite other people to lead your Bible study. So there are tons of amazing people out there. We just had we combined 3 churches in our area. The congregation I serve, an African white congregation that merged about 30 miles away from us, where my mom happens to serve, and then my home church in Stockton, Trinity Presbyterian Church, who is without a pastor. We had all 3 churches get together for Bible study, and we invited Ashley Datar-Burt, who's a pastor in New York City, if she would lead it.
Wow.
And so Ashley came in, and bless her heart, she stayed up late with us because our Bible studies didn't start until 6 our time. And she led 3 weeks of Bible study. And it's the first time I've been in a Bible study with my mom where neither of us were leading it. And I mean, but it was I wouldn't want to say easy, but it was like you're just coordinating people together, joint opportunity. There's no threatening nature about anything. And you bring a different voice in that you could never bring in other times. You're leveraging the technology to bring different voices in. So we, as our adult ed, we are already planning for 2021, inviting guest preacher and then leading 3 weeks of study for people that aren't in our area. So we're having some folks come in from all over the country just to come in and preach on a Sunday and then do 3 weeks of adult ed. And we're going to invite other churches. And again, there's no threatening nature about it because it's kind of what everybody's doing. And be able to have different voices speak into space. And for me, we don't have an associate right now. It just lessens my work. And so it's just a matter of, it's a program piece that I don't have to worry about. So there's a lot that can feed that. So that's one. The second thing that I would offer you to begin to do is to take your time off by exchanging worship services. If you can find another congregation that has worship that aligns with you theologically, or at least close enough where you can trust whoever's leading, to take your Sunday off and just have your whole congregation go worship somewhere else. And it can be an exchange or not, but it is an easy way now, if they're used to meeting online, if they'll do that they can go ahead and just worship with someone else. I mean, it's we've done it a couple of times with our folks, and we've been a host for about 5 churches where their pastor's like, where I'm taking the week off, can they just come to where you all are doing? And we're like, sure. So it's that's the other thing. I think the biggest game changer for digital space is going to be how you hold your meetings and how you see the future of your meeting spaces and what you're doing. I say that because what we've discovered is When I first got to this church over a year ago, I said to them, eventually, we're never having Sunday meetings. I do not like Sunday meetings. I want you to come to worship, and I don't want you in the middle of worship beginning to think about the agenda for Christian education or whatever. I want you to be in worship, be filled with the Spirit because the preaching was so awesome, and then go home. Right? That's what I want. I don't want you like thinking, and people are like, but it's the only time we can come. And I mean, all the reasons, and they're justifiable. I understand. Our session just decided this past week that there is no reason for us to ever meet in person again as a session. And I was like, okay. I mean, if we feel like we really need to, we will, but our meetings are shorter. The whole time people are committed to session is shorter, right? They're not driving to church, all that kind of stuff. They don't have to put on pants, that kind of thing. They just step up and then we're done with the meeting. And all of our meetings have now moved off of Sundays. And I found it interesting. And I was joking with them and said, I win. And they're like, whatever. So they've all moved off. And now we have people who are meeting with part of our groups who are not from our area. And so they're going to have to keep meeting in an online setting. And it's become fairly not just normalized, but I think people really enjoy it because it's a set amount of time and they get to roll up whatever space they're in, and then they're done and they're not having to worry about travel time and all of that with traffic and those kinds of things. So I think that once you begin to infiltrate some of the stuff into the life of the congregation, then all the other things become a little bit easier. So I would begin to think about your Bible studies or your groups and inviting outside voices, partnering with other churches now through some technology, and beginning to change how you do your internal work. What does it look like for you to do your work? And I know rural communities were doing some of this before pandemic just because of geography, but now there's an opportunity to do it even more. So there you go. All right. If we could draw me off a spot, that'd be awesome. We'll go to gallery. So we're kind of at the end of our time, I know, but I'd love to take some Q&A. If there's any questions, things that people want to share, I could talk about this stuff forever. I won't, but would love to hear some questions. It's only 5:30 here. I'm just gearing up for my evening.
Yeah.
We're going clubbing. That's not true at all.
Bruce,
Mm-hmm.
This is Wayne.
Yep.
One of the areas that we really haven't touched on is programming for children and youth on Zoom. We have a congregation here that continues to have Sunday school via Zoom for children. And in our group, I raised the option of why not someplace pull together a Mr. Rogers type half-hour worship service for children. Mm-hmm. And
Right.
Elizabeth tried to recruit me to do that, and I flatly refused.
Hey, if you offer a suggestion.
No.
So I will say, I don't talk about youth and children very much because I have nowhere to speak from. So our congregation right now, the first thing I did when I got there a year and a half ago was to stop having children's time because it basically only reminded us every time how few children we had. It was one of the saddest part of our service. We're like, all right, it's children's time. And we're looking around going, I hope somebody's here. So we have, I don't want to say it's a gift, but we have not had to deal with that as much in terms of how we work with our children. Our youth kind of meet separately, but we don't really have a program. I would point you to Addie Domsky, who is at Sunnyvale Presbyterian. Some of you may know Addie. Addie is doing amazing. Well, actually comes out of your area, right? Addie comes out. She went to Westminster and I think comes out of Pittsburgh area.
Her mom has been in Erie and is about to be in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And her brother is in Pittsburgh, Tyler Domsky.
Right. So Addie is doing really good work with youth at Sunnyvale Press and doing some creative things there around youth. I do not believe that she has children in her description, but she's doing amazing things. The other person I would point you to is Amy Kremis Parks, who is at Grace Covenant in Asheville. Amy is one of the most creative people I've ever met in my entire life, and does amazing things with children and youth, and just moved to Asheville, was at Fairlington in Ohio and Cleveland, and just moved to Asheville, North Carolina to Grace Covenant, where Marcia Mount Shoup is the pastor. So that would be, so Addie Domsky is one, and Amy Cremis Parks, who are doing what I've seen, kind of amazing work with young people and
Bruce,
children.
let me throw in from our area. Brian Wallace in Pittsburgh and his wife are doing they're making videos. There's lots of stuff. I'm carrying a fair amount of children's stuff going on. And if we maybe threw out an ask, even for our region, we would find it. But Amy Cremis and Addie are both superb.
Yeah.
And
I mean, and it's an opportunity, as long as people are secure with themselves. There's such a collaborative time in our church life. I do know that it is often difficult for pastors to share. And as much as we talk about wanting to be collaborative, we're always afraid at a certain level of our spirit that people are going to like someone else better than us. And I kind of am always like, that's if you're fed somewhere else more than you're fed here, that's fine. I would rather have you land somewhere where you're fed more than if you're going to be here wishing you were somewhere else. So I think pastors, there's such a great opportunity, but everybody has to be fairly secure with themselves about doing this, so that it's like, oh, look at all the youth they have. I don't want to lose our 3 young people. I'm like, well, but would you rather have them have a great church experience or nothing? So, I mean, I think that's, but such an opportunity. If you have people doing stuff already in your time zone, why not do some collaborating? That would make a lot of sense. Yeah. I love the Mr. Rogers idea, though. I know that's a regional, but we love him out here too. All right. Any other questions before we end our time?
Bruce, how do you, when I do online worship, it's usually not Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was on study leave, so I was off today. I tuned into several worship services while I unloaded the dishwasher and swept the floor. And can you talk a little bit about how to create engaging online worship, especially if it's not Zoom? Images, pictures.
So what are people using if not Zoom at this point? Are they just streaming to Facebook or streaming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. They were both streamed.
Okay. So I think streaming is fine. And I think when people say something is fine, they don't really like it, but I really do think it's fine. I mean, I think it's really difficult to do interactive, engaging worship streaming only because of the nature of the technology. Either YouTube or Facebook, your only real interaction is the chat room. I mean, that's your only space to really be active. And so it doesn't give you the tools and some of the bells and whistles to be able to do the things that we do on our service in Zoom. So we intentionally chose not to stream because of all of the things we can use for Zoom. So for instance, when I'm leading worship on Zoom, you'll see right there is our chancel. So I have a second camera that goes on this swing arm, and I place that in the corner of our worship space and then lock everybody's screen so that they all have the chancel in their top left-hand corner for their entire service. And then when we do spots, I can do multiple spotlights, so you can have up to 9 people that are all show up on the screen, and I get to determine that. So I think I use that technology so that we can create a kind of space that we want it to. I also would say, so I'm not really answering your question. So I think I've got back to Zoom. It's really difficult to do when you're streaming. That's why we chose not to do it. So the only way to really get it done well is what some people do is they stream and then they Zoom. So they stream and then they have a coffee hour Zoom meeting. Most places, they make sure they have at least 1 or 2 people who are tech deacons or chat deacons, whatever they want to call them, who are in the chat room, who are not the pastor, interacting with people. And that's about as good as you're going to get, is that interactive. So you could do things like questions and have them interact. But I just think it's so much better on a Zoom platform. The other platform to look at is called Alter Live. I think it's just alterlive.com. I can't remember that. So that's a new platform that's coming out. It's built on top of Zoom, but they are adding all of the technologies and features that most of us who do Zoom worship have always wanted. For instance, I met with them and I'm like, I want a Q&A function like that a webinar has, but I want it in a meeting so that it's not all chat. There's actually a Q&A function so I can be interactive during my sermon. And they're like, yes, that's going to be part of this, right? So there's all these things that they are building out. And Susan, you may want to talk with them. They'll do webinars and they'll send you a free tablet so you can test it. And there's all kinds of things. They haven't launched yet. But I'm not endorsing them yet, but they're the only ones out there who are beginning to think about this experience that's not limited by the technology. Because I think Zoom limits us in some of the things we want to do. Facebook does, YouTube does. And so this next phase of what people are doing are going to give us even more opportunity. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you how to be more interactive on those on the streaming, because what streaming for me is, again, it's fine. But it's more we're watching worship. And it's really hard to change that. When you're in a Zoom meeting, when you know that passing of the peace, I'm flipping over and everybody's going to be on the screen and you get to just unmute and it's craziness and chaos. Everybody wants to be there. And then I mute everybody. We come back. And so we have done interactive pieces in our Zoom service that force interaction in some ways, that make people feel like they're in the same space. So it's just a better platform if you really want to do interactive worship. All right, sorry. I don't own stock in Zoom. I don't get anything from them, but I do like them.
Tell us the name of that. Tell us
Oh,
the
go
name
ahead.
of that platform again.
Alter Live,
Thank you.
like as in an altar. Yep.
Bruce, did you say you can spotlight 9 people?
Yep.
On
Now
a
you can.
regular, on Zoom?
Mhm.
Regular Zoom Pro?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you can spotlight. You can now have people locked to whoever the host is. You can have them locked to that screen. So when we start worship, we put everybody in an order that we want people to see on their front page. It's usually just 4 or 5 people. It's the musician, the liturgist, me, and the cellist, the chancel. And so that 4 panel will stay up there for everybody, and then everything else switches around. But yeah. So we're doing ordinations of session members, all of that, and planning to be able to do that using spots. Cool.
Bruce, this is Wayne again, another wild idea that I threw out. One of the discussions across the denomination right now is membership in digital congregations. And I said, I can't wait until we have holograms so that we can cross time and space and be present.
That maybe. I don't even know. I thought you were just going to stop at I thought you were going to stop at the membership thing, because I think that is the next threshold, is people being comfortable with having members who are never going to set foot in your sanctuary. And what does that mean? And will your first session member who is not geographically located near you? And not every church, this is a capacity question, and you can debate this a lot, but that is a legitimate question. Since some of our churches who are online are seeing these reconnections with people who've never landed somewhere else back in church, why wouldn't we ask them to be on session if they're still members but happen to live in another place? I mean, it's an interesting conversation. I don't know whether that is exciting our folks in Louisville about the polity issues around that, or if they're just like, sure, whatever. But I think more churches are going to begin to see membership as a far beyond geography, we have a few people that are thinking about joining. I'm being very careful though about our congregation, is I'm not looking for people who are looking to leave a church because of like they're mad at a church and they're like, I wouldn't want that in a
Right.
face-to-face congregation. But if they're geographically isolated and there's really no options and they found us, come on in. I mean, I have no problem with that. So we're trying to make that dance, do that dance well to respect, other congregations. But at the same time, it's just, it's coming for those of us that are going
Yeah.
to continue online worship.
And I think we have to, as a parent of kids in their 20s, who had previously been tethered to jobs in offices. It's like COVID hits. Yeah, I'm moving to Denver. I'm going to South Carolina. Why do I need to be in the same geographic space? So I think I actually, to get metaphysical, I think our concept of space is changing.
Yep.
And I think there's a whole generation, anybody probably under 40 and who has been working, and anybody who's been working remotely, the idea that you have to be in a physical space in order to have a relationship is just, that idea is
Right.
just going to be foreign to them.
And I think where we fill a void is being really intentional about creating the intimate space that church offers to people. And that's where it's not just about having a meeting, it's about how do you create space that feels genuinely intimate, like you would in that casual conversation after worship when you're face to face, where you just get to be with three people and you're sharing deeply about something. And that's where I think taking this seriously, it's not going to last long term unless we take seriously that part of it, that we're creating intimate spaces for people to connect. And that's where the church, I think we have foundations for us to think about how to do that workspace doesn't necessarily have. And so I think that's the gift we offer to that experience, is we're going to take this space seriously and create these opportunities for you actually to get to know each other in a more deep, meaningful way. So I think that there's such an opportunity for us, I think.
Cool.
All right.
But does that necessitate, one more question. Does that necessitate rethinking the whole liturgy and order of worship?
It can. I don't think it's any different than how I would challenge people to rethink reorder of worship when they were in person. I think what this has done is it has allowed us to do that without the fight. In some ways, we're now able to do it without, you're not really, in some ways, everybody thought this was temporary. And for some, it certainly is. But, we just had a new members class today, and somebody said, so have you always had communion every Sunday? And one of our elders said, yeah, we've always had communion every Sunday. And we all looked at her and went, only since we started on Zoom. And she's like, oh, that's right. I mean, it was this, like, we had normalized this new practice, and all of a sudden we've always done it this way. But there was no theological debate about it. We just started, I'm like, we're going to have communion every Sunday because it takes 5 minutes. Let's just do it.
Right.
And we can just do it. So what I talk about people when they're thinking about online worship, I think about them reimagining what worship can be like, not just replicating what they did on Sunday. I think the services that are not going to last is if we replicate what we do on Sunday and just place it in front of a camera. And I think we have to reimagine. So, but ours, you would still recognize our service. Ours is a very traditional service. It's creatively traditional, very traditional. And we're going to think of a new service in addition to this one that's going to be a much more reimagined. But it, in some ways, it looks nothing like we did on Sunday. And there are certainly elements like, oh yeah, we did this on Sunday. So I think it gives us so much freedom as those of us who are planning worship to reimagine something that maybe we've always wanted to try, but we've never had this opportunity. And so I think it's a wasted opportunity if we're not rethinking worship at this point.
Cool.
Yep.
Bruce, would you pray us out?
I would love to.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yep.
Thank you everybody for being here. You
Yeah.
gave a lot to think about. This will be recorded. We're going to put it out there. People can revisit. If you're interested in more conversations, brainstorming together, let us know. We'll be happy to facilitate that.
If you
Go
want
for
to
it.
sit down and watch a 2-hour video again with all of us, that's
I No, there are all the, we have people that have been signing up and watching later.
Oh, are they really?
Oh, yeah.
God bless them. Yes, that's wonderful. That's great. That's great. All right, let's pray. God, for the imaginative and unexpected ways that we continue to be in community, for the ways in which we have connected to one another far beyond our own imaginations, we give you thanks. We ask, oh God, that you would continue to invite us and nudge us, challenge us, and care for us as we enter into these spaces. Hear every emotion that we may be feeling. Continue to nurture us into a deeper understanding of what it means to be the beloved community, and into a deeper understanding of what it means to gather in space. For this community and for the work their churches and leaders are doing in the world, we give you thanks. And for our families and communities that support what we do in the church and how we serve the church, we are indeed grateful. We thank you for this time. Let it nourish us not for just this night, but into the future, so that we may continue to be the body and beloved body of Christ that you have called us to be. We pray all this in the name of Christ, and all God's people say,
Amen.
Amen. All right, all.
Night.
Thank you
Have a great
all.
evening.
Have a good night. All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Bruce.